the alleged gunman who stormed a security checkpoint at a Washington hotel where the White House Correspondents Association dinner was being held, is scheduled to appear in federal court. Officials say the suspect, identified as 31-year-old Cole Allen of Torrance, California, was carrying multiple firearms and knives when he was subdued by authorities. It happened on the floor above where the dinner was taking place. President Trump confirmed that a Secret Service agent was injured in the shooting, but a bulletproof vest protected him. That agent has since been released from the hospital. U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C., Jeanine Pirro, said the suspect would be charged with 2 counts of using a firearm during a crime of violence and a second crime of assault on a federal officer using a dangerous weapon. She added more charges were expected. And Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche said yesterday the gunman appears to have been targeting members of the Trump administration. Cole Allen has been described as a highly educated part-time teacher and tutor, a former engineering student, and an amateur video game developer. D.C.'s interim police chief tells the Washington Post he had no immediately identifiable criminal history and was not previously known to law enforcement. He had not indicated a party affiliation in his Los Angeles County voter registration records, but had previously donated $25 to Act Blue, the Democratic PAC supporting Kamala Harris's 2024 presidential campaign. Let's bring in MS Now Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Dilanian.
You know, Ken, obviously, because of the way things broke, we got a lot of bad information initially out of people that were inside the room, suggesting that the shooter was dead, suggesting that the shooter had broken through the outer perimeter and had gotten past. But again, we just didn't know because everything was moving so quickly. You were there. You saw it firsthand. It seems, obviously, after just the absolute horrific job by the Secret Service in Butler, Pennsylvania, people were casting a wary eye on the Secret Service this time. But a couple things. First of all, he didn't get through the perimeter, did he? Like, the Secret Service did their job there, number one. But then number two, reports from the Washington Post yesterday that for some reason there were less Secret Service there than there would normally be at an event like this. What can you tell us?
Well, Joe, first of all, you're right. I was there, and I was sitting in the back of the room close to the door. And so I knew right away, as did everyone else at our MS Now table, that those were gunshots. It was very obvious. And it sounded like they were right behind us. And when I went to interview people who were even closer, people did tell me that they believed that the gunman was shot and killed. And that's why a lot of people were reporting that at the time. Many witnesses believed that they saw him on the ground, perhaps. And so, yeah, that was the source of that misinformation. But you're right. Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, and others have made very clear, the Secret Service director, that as far as they're concerned, the Secret Service did its job. The system worked. He did not breach the defenses, the perimeter. I mean, you can see on that video, he sprinted through an initial tranche of D.C. police officers who were milling around. But as soon as he got past them, they all drew their guns. Eventually, he was tackled. There was no way he was going to make it into the ballroom because there were other Secret Service agents armed outside the doors. So in that sense, the system worked. But the larger question around this entire event is the way it's always been structured for decades, which is that it's in the Washington Hilton, known as the Hinckley Hilton because it's where Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981. That is a working hotel. They don't close the hotel during the event. And so the members of the public can go in and out of the lobby and the ballrooms before they get to this ballroom where the dinner takes place, which is down 2 floors, essentially in the basement, in the bowels of the building. There are lots of members of the cabinet. There were Trump administration officials going to pre-parties. There was no security for that. So if this gunman had decided that instead of doing what he did, he wanted to walk into the Fox News pre-party and start shooting, that would have been an absolute disaster. And that's why this whole thing is being re-examined, because does it really make sense to have an open hotel with a dinner like this, which is essentially a State of the Union level gathering of the president, the vice president, members of the cabinet, prominent members of the media, business executives. That's where people are saying, and that's not the Secret Service's fault, obviously. There's a whole larger question of how do we secure this event? What decisions need to be made, Joe?
Yeah, and Jonathan Lemire, I've got to say, and we've said it before, and you and I have talked about this before. Meek and I certainly have said it for years. It just seems extraordinarily stupid to use an open hotel and get State of the Union type concentration of power in the United States, especially at a time of war against a country that's been the epicenter of terrorism since 1979, and have them walking around. Going in and out of parties, standing to get their pictures taken before they go in. It's never made sense to me. It's never made sense to Mika. We haven't been in, I don't know, maybe a decade. I can't remember the last time. But it seems like such an unsecure place. And by the way, this whole idea, and, you know, of course, how crazy that, like, everybody in Magosphere all, like, within 3 seconds started posting the same post, right? That was so coordinated about the ballroom. This event, as Sam Stein and others said, will never be held in the White House because it is not about the White House. It is about correspondence. All that being said, it seemed all these coordinated. It's remarkable how quickly they came right after. They must have received an email from the White House or from the press operation. But I just can't think of a dumber place to have this than at the Washington Hilton. I know it's history, but history be damned when you're putting your Secretary of Defense, you're putting your FBI director, you're putting the Secretary of Treasury, you're putting the Vice President, you're putting the President.
Well, I would say that's still on the Trump administration, the White House, whatever White House is in power, to make that decision, to have that concentration of power in one place at a time of war, 5 weeks after we decapitated Iran's government.
Right, and it's always been that way, but just because it's always been that way doesn't mean it needs to be that way ever again. Anybody that has been there understands. You aren't securing the entire hotel. You're not checking people's bags. You're not doing the basic things that it would be done, like at the State of the Union address. So yeah. I don't know. There's so much go here. But what is the verdict right now, based on the Washington Post story and everything else, about the security at this event? Again, especially in light of how heinous the security was in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the questions these next few days, is should there have been more security there? Especially this is the first year President Trump has decided to attend this event. We know there have been attempts on his life previously. Obviously, we're a nation at a time of war. I did not go to the event this year either. I spoke on Friday. I thought it was fraught and misguided this year in particular for the correspondents and the administration to be together. But I have been in the past. And Ken had hit on a really important point here. Like, the hotel remains open. Like, you walk in through the main doors, and, like, hotel guests often are lingering in the lobby or at the bar because they want to get a look at some of the, you know, reporters or dignitaries who walk in or not. That part's still open. And the gunman had free access there, reporting that he stayed at the hotel. But the gunman was nowhere near where the president was. The Trump himself was never in danger here. There were several layers of security between him and where the president was sitting. Certainly, you're right, Joe, to highlight the immediate call for the ballroom. Trump himself has said so. He said in his news conference later that night. He said again on Truth Social yesterday. This event would never have been in the ballroom. I know they've talked about rescheduling it in the next month or so. I'm not sure that's the best idea because I think the site needs to be reevaluated. I think this can be skipped. And I wonder about the future of the event altogether. But Ken, you know, this is still a very obviously scary moment for everyone in there who did not know that there were still layers of security. As you just said, those gunshots were loud. I know so many people in that room who were terrified. And credit to the journalists, by the way, who continue to do their jobs in that room. Credit to security personnel who did so well to get people to safety. The Secret Service and the police deserve an extraordinary amount of credit for what happened. But Ken, tell us what we know about the suspect here, the person that Mika just identified, the police have in custody. What may have motivated him? You know, what has he said or written? What can you tell us about why he did this?
Jonathan, it's really extraordinary. This is a person who attended one of the most prestigious STEM universities in the country, the California Institute of Technology, Caltech. got an engineering undergrad degree, got a master's in computer science, and was working, as Mika said early on, he was working as a part-time teacher, but he described himself as a game developer. You can find video online of him touting a wheelchair invention that allowed wheelchairs to be more stable. This was an accomplished, articulate person with a loving family, apparently, who went down a path of radicalization. And the reason we know that is he's written a 1,000-word document where he describes exactly why he did this. And he describes President Trump as a pedophile and a rapist. He doesn't explicitly say he was targeting Donald Trump, but he says he was targeting Trump administration officials. He apologizes to his family in this post. There's some evidence that he attended or was associated with a No Kings protest. So it really fits the pattern of what we've seen with Luigi Mangione, accused of killing the United Healthcare CEO, or Tyler Robinson, accused of killing Charlie Kirk, of this sort of people on the far left fringes who have become radicalized, who are living in a world of unreality, bombarded by conspiracy theories, who decide that they have to take violent action. And it's contributing to a climate of political violence in this country that we have not seen since the 1960s. So more questions will be asked, and you know, the FBI is poring over this man's writings and his social media. They served a search warrant on it. They were at his house in Torrance, California yesterday. So a lot more investigation still being done. But that 1,000-word document that's been widely published, and Donald Trump commented on it last night on 60 Minutes, that says a lot about and explains a lot about what appear to be the motives here, guys.
MS Now Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Dilanian will be following this with you. Thank you very much for coming on this morning.